I guess a lot of people are preaching patience, and that applies not only to people trying to get home, but also to people who are looking for answers, because the investigation into the terrorist attacks is focusing on the Islamic leader, of course, Osama bin Laden. And as the FBI hunts for evidence linking him to these attacks of terrorists, there's a fear that Ambassador Paul Bremer is familiar with. Of course, the former ambassador is former chair of the U.S. National Commission on Terrorism. He joins me this morning from New York. Good morning, Paul. And we spoke a couple of days ago when we were sort of going through theories of, who may have been able to have done this. All signs now pointing to Osama bin Laden, this coming from even the Secretary of State, Colin Powell. From what you have seen and given your extensive experience, are you starting to see what appears to be a familiar pattern pointing towards bin Laden?
Yes, we are, and the similarity is with the investigations into the East Africa bombings, where we saw the extensive use of sleepers, as they're called, people who are basically integrated into the local community and then called upon months, or in this case maybe even years later, to conduct a terrorist attack.
Who sponsors bin Laden, and who sponsors groups like this?
Well, he gets a lot of support, obviously, from the Taliban government in Afghanistan. That's where he lives. That's where he has his training camps. He gets support from some wealthy individuals in the Gulf area. He may get support from other states. It's not yet clear that this was an operation that he conducted on his own. There may have been state support involved in it. We'll have to wait and see where the evidence goes.
Is there a fear that if there's a focus solely on bin Laden, that perhaps other potential suspects may be overlooked in this search?
Yeah, I think our response here has to move on three dimensions, or three concentric rings. In the first case, we're going to have to deal with whoever did this attack in whatever states provided support. At the moment, it looks like that's bin Laden and Afghanistan. The second area, we're going to have to then go after similar kinds of groups related to him that are located in cells all over the world in 40 or 50 different countries, including both Canada and the United States. That's going to be a long-term process of rooting these people out with intelligence cooperation and law enforcement cooperation. And thirdly, we're going to have to basically change the way the international community thinks about terrorism. We really have, in the last 10 years, seen a falling away from the kind of Western resolve that was developed in the 1980s to deal with terrorism. Countries have gotten lax, including and perhaps even especially the United States over the last decade. That's got to stop. We're going to have to take advantage of this outpouring of grief and sympathy and support we've seen in Canada and in Europe to really mobilize a new international approach to terrorism.
I was reading a story in this morning's Boston Globe which is suggesting that the beginnings of this attack may go back as far as 5 years ago, when people were actually training for it, and most notably the flight training that they were taking. Given the fact and what you're saying here about being lax on terrorism, I mean, it's not like this happened overnight. If it had gone back 5 years, I mean, what does this highlight in terms of the problems with the U.S. intelligence in tracking these people?
Well, it highlights what I think now everybody knows, which is that we had a massive failure of our intelligence, both externally, which is the job of the CIA primarily, and internally, which is the job of the FBI. And I'm sure that coming out of this, there's going to be a real re-examination of our capabilities in both those areas. What is personally, to me, heartbreaking, and my company, Marsh McLennan, had more than 1,700 people in the South Tower of the World Trade Center, of whom we only can account for 1,000 now. But it's personally heartbreaking to me that the National Commission on Terrorism, a bipartisan commission which I chaired, made a number of recommendations to the President and Congress 15 months ago, none of which have been carried out.
I can't imagine what you're going through now. I didn't realize, and we had spoken with you earlier, that you'd suffered there, you had this personal connection to this as well. I'd like to thank you so much for making time for us again today.
Thank you.
The television images of the attack